Hello, hello, Red Cape Revolution. It is Darcy here, and I am so happy to have time today with my friend, longtime colleague, and author of the all new The Introverted Leader, Building on Your Quiet Strength, Dr. Jennifer Kahnweiler. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, Darcy, it's always so wonderful to see you. And Jennifer, please, the doctor right now.
Yeah, no, the doctor is in.
Yeah,
So,
the doctor's in the house, right?
so we were just recalling this before we started recording. And so we met a long time ago in Atlanta at a coaches meeting. And the first version of this book, which looks very different than this book, had just come out. And I'm like, somebody's writing about introverts. How interesting, how interesting that that's a whole field. And this was way before Susan Cain and Quiet, and way before, the all this the so many people have been talking about the land of the introvert. And so I would love to hear, Jennifer, from you, like your journey to this topic. And that's been, gosh, over 10 years at least
Oh,
since.
longer,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what
Yeah.
brought you to this topic? And then tell me about the progression now, because you just released the
Yeah.
third version, which is all updated, especially with the new world of work, hybrid
Right.
workplaces,
Yeah.
remote jobs, which change the dynamic for
Yes, it did.
introverts as well as the extroverts, working with them and leading them. So tell me about this journey for you.
Yeah. Wow. Some great questions to unpack there. Darcy, I always love being on your interviews because it's an excuse for us to also get to see each other again, which shouldn't be so far apart. But I always admire the work that you do in coaching, and you're my role model in terms of staying connected with your community. So, to your question, so I, actually was interested in this before I started writing. My first book came out in 2009, the first edition of The Introverted Leader, and it was, as you say, a picture of it was a different cover. It's a picture of a Superman. Back then it fit a Superman with a big eye on it. Of course, things have evolved since then, so that really didn't fit for this one. I love our new cover, and we were just discussing it, just really talking about the strength that's internal, right? Doesn't have to be the loudest voice in the room, but is powerful, right? So I love that whatever you read into the cover, but um, and I'm an extrovert, so I'll say that at the out front. Full disclosure. There were two tracks. Married to an introvert in my early 20s. What first attracted me to Bill in the Washington University dorm was, his quiet, his calm. He was so different than me, the yin and the yang. I grew up in a very loud, extroverted New York family, so it was kind of really new to me to have that kind of vibe going on. And as things happened over time progressed, we got married, and God, I can't believe it was 50. We just celebrated our 52nd anniversary.
Wow,
Thank
congratulations. And I
thank
know
you.
he's participated on the podcast that you have too,
Yes, we
Introvert
just
Alley.
right, and I think those are always the highest rated podcasts because he's very funny too, and it's kind of like our dynamic is sort of like a macro. I think you would say about how introverts and extroverts do or don't get along, or our differences, I should say. So what happened was what was really attracted to me after a while was really frustrating and perplexing me because I didn't understand why he would be so shut down after being with people and not talk for sometimes hours, and I had no idea about introversion and extroversion. So you had mentioned coaching. I was a counselor back in the day and working in schools, and had the opportunity to go to a workshop on the Myers-Briggs. And that was the instrument that, a lot of folks are familiar with. That was an iteration, right, of Carl Jung's theory, introversion, extroversion, put together by a mother-daughter team. Uh, Catherine Briggs and Myers, Isabel Briggs, Catherine Meyer. I may be mixing them up, but the mother daughter looked at different biographies of famous people through the years, through the ages, and they expanded on Carl Jung's theory of introversion, extroversion, where he was really the basis of saying, introversion is people like Bill who are internally focused. It's not like they don't like people, but their energy comes from in their heads, deep thought, listening, preparation, really embracing quiet. And So what happened was I had this real revelation that I realized that and confirmed that I was an extrovert, probably even more extroverted when I was younger, as many of us, kind of morph, right? It's a bell curve. So it's a spectrum. Now we know that it's evolved into thinking about introversion, extroversion. It's not so binary. We can be very close to one side or the other, right? And so I have developed more of my introvert qualities, thank God, thank goodness. Not totally introverted, but I've gotten that. And I think you and I could probably agree with that. So this was going on in my home life, and really, I wouldn't say that it saved our marriage, but it certainly didn't hurt in terms of us having one tool that was very useful in me understanding that Bill wasn't trying to purposely frustrate me, that he totally needed that time. And I needed the time to talk about my thoughts. And that's how I got clear about things. And so once we had this tool, it was really helpful. So as I then fast forward, moved into working in organizations, I was doing a lot of leadership development, coaching, developing career programs for companies. I worked internally in corporations, big and small, a lot in technology, worked at GE for a number of years doing, working with IT folks. But it didn't kind of matter who I was landing with. When I would start to talk about this dimension of personality, people were kind of interested, didn't really understand. But then when we would go deeper into it, they really resonated with particularly the introverts, with having some terms and some understanding and insights into why they felt oftentimes a fish out of water. They felt talked over in meetings, not able to get their thoughts in quick enough, feeling overlooked even tangibly with career promotions. Like for some reason they didn't get that job even though they were working hard. So there were a lot of both subtle and more direct examples of bias that were happening to them. And so once we would go into this, and my whole message was, don't try to become an extrovert. You have wonderful qualities, and we'd focus a lot on what are your strengths that have gotten you to where you are. How can you leverage those more? And that's where the subtitle, building on your quiet strength. How do you use listening to connect with people? Maybe you're not in a big group talking about your project, but you have focused, engaged conversations with the key stakeholders in your world. So there are lots of examples that they would then come up with, and they started to get, I noticed, as collectively more confident. And we started to see results when people could step into their strengths. So it was very gratifying for me. I kept looking for resources, Darcy, like I would write articles. I would look, there was back in the, what was it, 2008, 2009, there really was very little. So I decided, like a lot of us do, when we want that book and we can't find it, we end up writing it, right? So that was what happened. That's the long story of how the first edition of the Introverted Leader came. And then there were, that's been the most popular book, but other books have also done well and hit a nerve. And my readers have told me what they needed. So the first book is about development of yourself and how do you lead in different scenarios too, and how do you do presentations, how do you network, things that help you as a leader. And what I did was a lot of research. I didn't say this is what you should do. I asked introverted leaders who were successful, right?
Which even, at the time, and even now, I would say there's some people who might think is introverted leader an oxymoron, right? Because the model development have is still this kind of old school, hard charging, out in front, charisma focused person. Yet, both in the book, for the new book, and as well as all your work and your podcast as well, you've interviewed many leaders who are leading from within, leading with their quiet strengths, making those decisions about how they work best and adapting, not changing who they are, but understanding how they need to adapt or what they need to ask for differently in the workplace to make the work better. So I would love to hear a little bit about that from the leadership perspective of that, that pressure to be the leader that's like, I'm out in front when you're more introverted.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you talk about that, because one of the themes that came out from this past season of our podcast, and I've seen change, like an evolution of what's occurred here. Many introverted leaders have said very, very forthrightly the way they became successful, the way they continue to grow. Well, they certainly push themselves. And part of that pushing, it isn't stepping so far out of their comfort zone so they're completely exhausted. But what they do is they realize if it's, there was a quote that was said, Doug Conan quoted other folks about this. If it's to be, it's up to me.
Mm.
So they also realize that they live in a world that is definitely extroverted, skewed. So they have done a lot to adapt, and what's happens is, so an example, what would be an example? So they go to a networking function, which many introverts hate.
Right.
A
You have a whole chapter in your book on networking, which
yeah. And I love the example, like you asked for, what do leaders do? So I love the example of Jill Chang, who wrote a book in Taiwan. She was motivated to do this after the whole slew of introvert awareness came out. And Jill is very extremely introverted, is a leader of a large multinational company. She works remotely. She was at a professional association where a meeting where her task was to get a certain number of leads that were real viable leads for her company. And she walked into this event and it was just overwhelming, like for a lot of introverts will say that. But she used her introvert skill to go back to her room and go through the list of participants and target the ones that she wanted to meet with. She would then send them messages and set up a series of appointments during that uh, actual conference, and walked away with some very large contracts.
Mhm.
And that's just one of many examples where, again, it's stepping back and saying, okay, how can I strategically do this so it doesn't exhaust me? Because she was overwhelmed walking into that room,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and I would say her
Yeah,
strategy, even for an extrovert, might be more productive because if any of us have walked into those big rooms, actually,
exactly.
I had a client talking about this the other day. It's like, I'm going to this conference. That we know that some of our targeted potential clients are going to be there. I just have to be on the lookout for them. I'm like, across 2,000 people in a ballroom, who are all doing different things. Some
Yeah,
folks are at the shrimp table, and some folks at the vendor table, and some people are in the bathroom or in their hotel room. It's like, how it's a needle in a haystack.
yes,
But her strategy sounds, much,
yeah. That's
and
it,
then
it totally.
knowing yourself and having great one-on-one meetings, which are more effective. So
And I will say too, a major theme too that came out, and you're asking about leadership. And I got this as we were doing COVID fireside chats during that time, before COVID. I always say before and after. I'm sure a lot of us do, right? How things changed. And one of the things that happened was there wasn't any interest. It was very hard to get interest in this topic from more senior level people. Like they were just like, this is not on their radar. They had a lot of other really pressing issues on their plate. But when they were home, we're talking about CFOs, CEOs who were like open to having conversations. So one of the things I saw, and it kept happening, was that leaders who were vulnerable, who would talk about what their struggles were as they came up through the food chain, as they moved through different roles and became more visible and had more responsibility. They shared those vulnerabilities, like Brene Brown talks about how important that is. And they also talked about what they did differently than maybe the typical extrovert would be. And what they were doing was, Darcy, modeling effective leadership.
mm,
And so I think that's another point about what introverted leaders do. And you're asking about leadership. They really are out front about saying who they are. And I had many examples of that. Pat Waters, who's one of the role models in this area, who actually has on her bio, Pat Waters, she's a senior VP of HR and or CHRO. She talks about Pat Waters, introvert, she has on her bio, introverted leader. And
mhm.
she realized early on when she had a team of extroverts, like 10 people who were not connecting with her. And she had a coach. She always uses a coach like you. And she said, I don't know what's happening here. And they said, well, we'll do a 360. She goes, no, I don't want you to do a 360. I just want you to talk to them. And what she found was that they felt she was inaccessible, that she would eat lunch alone, she had no idea that they were making these impressions of her, right? Perceptions. So she ended up starting to talk to people and saying what she needed. She had a young baby at home. Here's what's happening with me. And when that everything turned after that, when she was more vulnerable and shared. But a lot of times people are just unaware that that's so critical, Darcy, don't you think?
Isn't that fascinating? I have a tool that I use in some of the teams that I coach.
Uh-huh.
It's called the User Guide to Me. And you've probably heard of this concept. It is basically, I'm writing out the roadmap to working successfully with me. It's like, here's the stuff that ticks me off. Here's the stuff
Right.
I could talk about all day. Here's the things that are going on behind the
Yeah,
scenes you might not know. And it can be a really powerful conversation. But
very powerful.
to your point, and you can talk about this in the book of like the introvert not trying to be somebody they're not, but to be more revealing of this is who I am and this is what I need for us to get this collective project, whatever we're working on, done. And amazing how once that leader felt she could just reveal that, it's like, hey, folks, here's what's happening when I'm eating lunch by myself, or here's
Yeah,
what's happening when I'm not on email 24/7. And to both model that it's okay, but also to model that, like, hey, you may like to have lunch with the whole team every day. Like, that's great. And
that's right.
make all sides okay as long as the performance and the work and everybody's communicating and getting together. So,
And so true. And to your point, with leaders understanding introversion, extroversion, this translates too into so many scenarios, meetings.
mm,
Now that meetings, and how do you engage a group virtually and in person when you have that lens of like, oh, one person kind of keeps a tick mark of how many times the same people spoke, right? To just, if you don't have that awareness, you're just going in and the same folks are contributing. You're not hearing from half the group, perhaps.
right.
So, with the leaders who understand introversion, extroversion, or what their styles are of their team members, it makes a tremendous difference. As particularly now, you mentioned, the workplace setting, remote and hybrid. We have people going back to the office now, right? You were writing about that, I believe. And that's a challenge, but having that awareness, it's like, oh, okay, maybe when we design the new space, we have plenty of ideas in the last book on creating shameless self-promotion, creating introvert friendly workplace. But what successful companies have done to arrange the workspace. So there's a combination of like collaboration opportunities, socialization, but also focus. Many people now are going back to the office to focus because home is very distracting, right?
Yeah. And not,
So,
not not set up to
yes,
be just the workplace, right? Yeah.
that's right. That's
So
right. And counterintuitively, I was just going to say about commuting, it's very interesting because we assume I had really high marks for like when we did surveys with introverts about, oh, I God, I'm so glad I don't have that commute. But I've been talking with people lately who say, you know what? I hate the commute, but it's that break I have that's the quiet. When I go home, it's crazy. So I like that. It's interesting. It's kind of like a mixed bag,
yeah, well, and I'd
right?
be curious to your take on, so one of the things in this transition period, right? I don't know if we'll ever be we'll never be in the same place we were again, right? But what I'm
Wow.
hearing from a lot of my clients is that
Yeah.
yes, we're in the office, but sometimes we're in the office, but we're still doing this because our teams are all over the world. Um,
Mhm.
we still do have some exceptions where people are at home or our company hasn't fully decided. It's like as long as stuff's moving forward, we're not going to shake we're not going to say you're one or the other. Uh, so if for someone who's listening, who's an introvert and who maybe is leaning towards saying, I would rather stay home.
Mhm.
Tell me sort of the pros and cons of that.
Yeah, and I think that's important to document individually, what's working and what isn't for you to understand that, and also for you to may perhaps be able to make a case, for your depending on the flexibility of your job and your your company, So yeah, there's a lot of pros and cons. I mean, we could talk about this for a while, but I mean, I think, of course, in terms of pros, the ability to not have interruptions and to be able to focus, positively at work, at home, can be a real plus. I mentioned before, you also can focus in the office, but people have really gotten used to that and that flexibility. That came out very high on our surveys. Being able to go to the gym at lunchtime, those kinds of things. Be able to go to see your kid or take them to the dentist, without the stress of having to ask for a leave, but as long as you get the work done. So that there's many, many positives. And those of us who have been remote for a while, like you and me, know that, right? The thought of going back to an office now would be very would be very challenging.
On a regular basis, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So I think many introverts, they still rate remote extremely high, but they also rate hybrid high, because what happened with it was, and this gets to your point about the challenge. Um, Overuse of a good thing can be a weakness. We learn that in coaching, right? So what can happen is if we are alone too much and we're not connecting, and I believe it is possible to connect virtually with intention. If we're not doing that, then we are just talking with our teams. We're not like hearing about what's going on in the rest of the culture, of the organization. We're not getting FaceTime, if you will, necessarily with the people that matter. Or so when I say FaceTime, they don't understand what our assets are, that we could bring to the table. We also, many introverts, and I researched this in Quiet Influence. We wrote about what happens when you're alone too much, and you just keep having the same thoughts go on. You don't get any creative ideas that burst through that you can get. And also, we've heard a lot about mental health issues over the last few years, and that can happen too from loneliness. You're alone. You're with, maybe you got a dog or a cat. That's it, and you're not prone to be one to initiate, conversations. So I think the antidote to that I've seen working is that companies that intentionally they really think about this, and they think, how are we going to get people to connect, particularly if they're remote? I'll give you one quick example. Josh Crawford, who I highlighted on my website and written about, is a leader at Synchrony, which used to be GE Capital. He had a remote team, and he got some results back from the work from Best Places to Work survey, and which is, highlighting different companies, and they do surveys, what the culture survey of the company. And they found that people were feeling disconnected, and they were feeling isolated, and they're all over the world. So he decided to start a book club with his team. And fortunately, he picked one of my books, so I got involved and was involved in the kickoff. And it was a wonderful way that he talks about the results of it. One of the unintended things, and they were going to just learn and study and talk, but he gave people different roles. So they were kind of not forced to, but they had to work together with people they never worked before. So it was a wonderful way for them to engage over a period of a couple of months. And just examples like that of managers who are being creative about what they're doing to get people connected. To your point earlier about going to the office, yeah, that really frustrates me when I hear that you just, sometimes you're just on Zoom calls all day. There needs to be opportunities for people to connect in person.
And I think one of the challenges is also, I've talked to some folks who have identified themselves as introverts, and I think you alluded to it before. The tendency is not for them to put themselves in a louder, more people focused situation. And yet, once in a while, when they do, like the commute, they're glad that they did. So, you talk about this, and you have a formula in the book that includes prepare and pushing. Like sometimes
Yes.
to push in the same way that I, as more of an extrovert, but as I get older, showing more introverted qualities, but
Mhm.
that I might have to push myself to create space for the folks that I know are more introverted, right? So tell me a little bit about the formula that you
Yeah.
have in
Yeah, I
the book,
love that.
kind of at a high level. I want people to go pick it up, read it, whether you're an introvert or you are working with
Yeah.
introverts. It is really
Well,
helpful.
right. And what we've done is, and I appreciate you saying that you flexed as well. When I was approached about doing a third edition, I really didn't have any intention on doing it. But when I took some time to think about it, because it was a year ago, And I thought, I know this is going to be a big commitment, right? Even writing a new edition, but it also offered a wonderful opportunity, to take what's working and to improve that. And so what we did was we kept the 4 Ps, which, as you said, I like that term formula. It's really good. And people like that. You mentioned Susan Cain's book. It was wonderful, and it made a big difference in my work getting seen. If people want to know what are steps I can take.
And what can I do? Like, it's nice to know that I'm not alone, but what can I do, Jennifer?
What can I do? I go back to work and I need to figure out what to do. So we took the 4 Ps came from one of my brilliant editor who helped me in the book. And he said, you have all these ideas, let's put them in a framework. And that we kept, and what we added to, and so it was the 4 steps, just overview, is prepare, which is leveraging the strength of an introvert, right? And by the way, this came all from introverted leaders who said, they told me what they did. They said they prepare. The second thing they do is presence. So once they're prepared, they don't look back. They say, okay, I've done the work. I've got the speech ready. I've got the scary talk with my senior leader ready. I've got all the talking points. I'm going to be in the moment. I'm going to be where my feet are. That's presence. And that's really what drew me to this work in the first place, by the way. I had introverted leaders who were with me when they were with me. They weren't all like distracted, right? They were listening. They were focused. So the presence really is extremely important. And that's what I focus on a lot with people. And then the push you mentioned, Darcy, before, which is stepping out of your comfort zone, stretching, but not, like if you go to the gym and you overdo it, then you feel it the next day. That's too much, but you definitely want to feel it. You want to feel like you're using that muscle a little bit more. So maybe it's, reaching out. You set a goal for yourself. I'm going to reach out to 2 people outside of my team this week just to check in with them. That could be a stretch goal. So we all know about stretch goals, but it's being very intentional about that. And then the 4th one is practice. So every virtuoso continues to practice. They never sit on their laurels. Jerry Seinfeld, I love the comedian lessons he shares. And he said, it's like, his comedic muscle is like broadband. If you don't use it, it shrivels up. It's actually physically shrivels up. And so we all know that if we don't use a skill, it gets old. And so a lot of times introverted leaders will say that people, and you may have heard this with your clients, Darcy, that people say, you're not an introvert. There's no way you're an introvert. And part of that is because they have learned to adapt and have developed these skills that extroverts, many of them find easy, starting a conversation. They learn steps to do that, through using things like the 4 Ps. But then they still need their time, right? So it's really interesting. The 4 Ps we kept. What we did, the way we enhanced it too, was we had lots of examples from, as I mentioned earlier, higher level leaders, diverse people from all over the place who were sharing their stories. And
You'll hear that gives you some
there you go.
like ways to incorporate all of the the 4 Ps again. Prepare, presence, push, practice. So around building in breaks, using tech wisely. We could do a whole podcast just on using tech wisely, because I mean, especially now with the advent of AI. Pro con for introverts is that, again, I think that you will probably be addressing that on your podcast at some point.
For the next season. And I think the 4 Ps also is another, just a tool that people can use when they're coaching. We do a lot of sales to coaches who use this with their clients. So you might say, so where are you on this particular strength right now, or this leadership scenario in terms of managing your team? Okay, so let's focus in on that. So we don't want people to feel like they have to do everything at once. Do you know what I mean?
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, what's one lesson for the introverts listening and one lesson for the extroverts listening that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah. Well, for introverts, I want you to own your strengths and to really use them, to step into them and use them, for understand what they are. And extroverts, I want the same for you, but I want you also to be allies, to be advocates for those people who don't necessarily haven't found their voice yet in your workplace. and speak up for them, and you will make such a difference as an introvert ally and champion.
That's great. Terrific. And which is the name of your podcast, right? Introvert Alley, right? And you have
Introvert ally. Exactly.
a
Exactly.
a newsletter on LinkedIn of the same name. And so
And yeah, totally. And I did want to mention too that we have a giveaway. If people go to my website, I'll give you the link there. And it's called the Quiet Journal. It's another new edition, and it speaks to really understanding, doing some self reflection that we've talked about in this interview, about your own, areas that make a difference for you. So yeah, and you can download it and write right on the form. So I'll put the link. I'll send the link to you.
terrific. We'll have that in the show notes. And it
Great.
sounds like something any of us can do
Oh
more
yeah.
quiet reflection, right?
I think so. I think
u-
so.
and use those introverted sides of us to know what we think and how we can make our difference in the world. So well,
Absolutely.
Jennifer Kahnweiler, thank you so much for being here again. The book is The Introverted Leader. It's the all new third edition with new sections on managing through the new workplace, through hybrid situations, remote work, technology, all the things. So please go out to pick it up. Jennifer, where else can people find you?
And I just want to say thank you, Darcy Eikenberg, for being my ally and also an introvert ally. People can get the book wherever books are sold. And we also know that you can, reviews really help people learn about the book. So if you can write a short review on Amazon, you don't have to buy the book there. You can buy it wherever you like, independent bookstores. And so feel free to just leave a short review. That makes a big difference. It would warm my heart. And Darcy, I so appreciate your time today for interviewing me.
You is always a vote for the author as well as a purchase of the book. So
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thanks for all the work you do. And thanks everybody for being here today.